All right, everybody. So this is going to be the first video and episode in our trauma medicine series. Okay, this is going to be a series that basically goes all the way through the sequence of treatments that we use to save someone's life in a traumatic injury event. Okay, so we have what's called an acronym that's called MARCH. Some of you may already be familiar with it. For those that aren't, it's basically a sequence of how we treat injuries when we come upon a traumatic event. The order of precedence in which we treat them, okay? So the very first letter of that is M, right? MARCH, which stands for massive hemorrhage. And we'll get into the rest of the acronyms, or the rest of the letters in the acronym in future videos. But for this video, M, massive hemorrhage, it's the first letter because it is the most common type of battlefield death or traumatic injury death, right? So for those of you who don't know, the vast majority of battlefield deaths from, the Civil War and even before, up until really Desert Storm 1 and even into Global War on Terror, was injuries to extremities, right? So gunshot wounds, amputations, and people bleeding to death because of those injuries. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is tourniquets, right? The tourniquet is the most important trauma medicine life-saving device by far. This is what took battlefield deaths in Vietnam from almost 60,000 to the Global War on Terror, only about 9,000 deaths comparatively, right? So was the combat any less between the two wars? The amount of injuries, was it any less? Not really, right? Pretty similar in a lot of ways. It's just that life-saving treatments have evolved since then. So in Vietnam, people would be surprised to hear that your average soldier didn't carry tourniquets, right? Maybe a medic did, but it was pretty rare, right? So a lot of extremity deaths. Whereas into the Global War on Terror, even your basic foot soldier infantryman is carrying tourniquets and understands how to use them, right? So this has drastically reduced the amount of battlefield deaths and traumatic injury deaths, right? So we're going to talk everything tourniquets, from the proper application and use, misconceptions. There's a lot of bad information out there about tourniquets. We're going to address that. I'm going to show you guys how to set these up in the way I like to, and the way we do in SOF, so that we can easily use it on ourselves one-handed if we need to, and also setting them up to make it easier for you to actually apply these in a super high stress situation, which any traumatic injury event is. Okay, so we'll just get right into it and talk about what a tourniquet actually is. What is its use? Well, its whole function is to stop the blood flow to an extremity, right? So if I take a gunshot wound to the arm, I get my leg amputated, this tourniquet will go on and will stop the blood flow from continuing to bleed out or bleed through my arm and then out of my body, right? So the fastest thing that is going to kill us in any traumatic injury event is bleeding out, loss of blood, okay? So for awareness for you guys, for something like a femoral artery laceration, you can bleed to death in 2 minutes or less, potentially, depending on your body and whatnot. Now, you can't necessarily treat that with a tourniquet. That'll be for the next video, wound packing, but just shows you how fast you can actually bleed out and bleed to death. So applying this tourniquet properly and efficiently in a very timely manner is extremely important, okay? So next thing, what types of tourniquets? There's all sorts of different types of tourniquets. You have professional grade, like cat tourniquets I have here. There's soft T tourniquets. Anything can be, technically, improvised tourniquets. You can use a belt, a bunch of different things. Anything that can potentially put enough pressure to stop the blood flow. But obviously, ideally, we should be using a professional tourniquet, okay? Statistically, and I think ease of use for me personally, and most people would agree, the cat tourniquet is by far the best tourniquet, okay? That's not just my opinion, right? The statistics have come from military hospitals downrange. For example, in Iraq, in a hospital called Kraj in 2008, they did a big study. They had over 400 casualties come in from combat with tourniquets on. extremity wounds and whatnot. And the cat tourniquet was found to be the highest rate of success in stopping the bleed and saving people's lives. So I would suggest to use cat tourniquets. They're also, again, I think the easiest to use, the most user-friendly, especially in high-stress scenarios, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is, okay? So next thing, let's address some bad information out there about tourniquets, okay? So write down the list, right? The most common one you'll hear is you don't want to, a tourniquet should be a last resort. You don't want to put a tourniquet on because they can potentially lose their arm or lose their leg. That is wildly inaccurate for the most part, guys, okay? The amount of time you would actually have to leave that tourniquet on to lose a limb is extreme, right? It would be 12 plus hours probably. In the civilian world, we're not going to be in a situation where we're not going to get to higher level care, and the amount of time it takes for that to happen, okay? So you're much better off just, when in doubt, put the tourniquet on, okay? I'd much rather you save my life than worry about me potentially losing a limb, which is not going to happen. For example, that same study, that same hospital, of the 400 casualties that came in, nearly 400 tourniquets placed on arms, and this is battlefield, right? So it had taken them, some of them, a long time to get to the hospital. 0 limbs of all those patients were lost because of a tourniquet. Now, there is some danger to having a tourniquet on too long, right? That danger essentially is when I leave the tourniquet on too long, the blood that's no longer circulating up to my heart and oxidizing is stuck down in my leg or my arm. And it can basically, it turns toxic. So once that blood turns toxic, if I yank that tourniquet off and it all rushes to the rest of my body, it can kill me, okay? So number one rule for us with that is once we put the tourniquet on, we never take it off, okay? Us as lifesavers, right? We let the surgeons, the doctor, the hospital, they will deal with that part of it, okay? Whether it's been on 5 minutes, an hour, 10 hours, right? Once it's on, it's on. We don't mess with it, right? So other thing, if other sort of misconceptions, right? One is you should use it for any type of bleeding, okay? Not necessarily true, right? It needs to be massive hemorrhage bleeding that we're controlling. If I have a knife cut and it's not arterial, it's not venous, there's not a whole lot of blood coming out, that doesn't necessarily directly need a tourniquet, right? So use your better discretion. If you can see a ton of blood or the blood is pooling up on the ground, has soaked clothing through, that is massive hemorrhaging. That is time to use a tourniquet, all right? So the next one you'll see is that, and so you know guys, tourniquets hurt really, really bad when they're on you, applied it correctly, okay? The casualty is not going to want to have them, especially, you know, if they've just been shot, they're freaking out, they're anxious, and you have this super painful tourniquet on, a lot of casualties will try to take that off. Funny story, in Afghanistan, I treated a dude that got shot, put a tourniquet on him, passed him off to his Afghan teammates, and when I came back after the gunfight to check on him, he was bleeding to death. All his tourniquets had been taken off because his buddies told me that his tourniquet hurt too bad, so they took him off, and he was bleeding to death. So again, don't do that. It's gonna hurt, and you need to monitor your casualty, make sure they're not taking or loosening their own tourniquets, okay? The tourniquet needs to be tight enough to stop the bleeding, and it's gonna be painful. All right, sorry, just reading off my list of my trauma notes in class so I don't forget anything, okay? So, and also taking the tourniquets off if you think that the patient's only gonna have a short time to get to the hospital or hand off to the EMT. Again, we are not taking tourniquets off. That used to be something that we talked about doing, sort of loosening the tourniquet to allow blood flow to get in and out, and retightening and all that. We've gone away from that, okay? You put it on tight, you stop the bleeding, you save the person's life, and we leave it at that, okay? We don't touch it anymore. All right, so just some takeaways from that, right? Don't be afraid to put a tourniquet on, okay? You're not gonna cause permanent damage to the person, right? Unless they have it on for 20-something hours, which they absolutely should not in the civilian environment, okay? You're gonna be fine. And again, monitor your patient, don't let him take tourniquets off, all those good things, okay? So let's talk about how we actually set the tourniquet up, okay? So there's, again, a lot of bad information out there on this as well. So a lot of people think or have been taught that you should store your tourniquets completely undone, right? Not through the clasp or anything like that. Sure, that sounds fine in practicality, but what I have seen, and the reason why we don't do this, is this seems great until you're actually in the event you have to treat a casualty that's been severely wounded, especially if you're in a high stress environment, active shooter scenario. Your blood is going to be pumping, your adrenaline is going to be through the roof. Anybody who's been in scenarios like this knows your fine motor skills are going to be pretty much gone. So I've watched a lot of guys trying to put this on a casualty and get this through the clasp as their hands are shaking like this and their patient's bleeding out on the ground, okay? That's why we don't do this, especially if it's nighttime, right? You can't see what you're doing. Bad idea, okay? Do what you want, right? This video is hopefully to give you guys a better way to do things. If you think you can do this and you're better than everyone else in the world out there and you could do this under duress, okay, more power to you. But most likely you won't be able to, okay? So how do I like to set mine up? So I like to, if you guys can see this, right? We take it from its completely opened stage here. We put it through the clasp, right? And I like to get about 10 inches of loop here, right? You can see my windlass here on this side, okay? I've got about 10 inches. So you can see it's kind of like a necktie, right? And then what I do is I take it and fold over the excess on top of that, okay? It gets us to about here, right? You can fold that down, okay? Now, this is in a nice compact tourniquet placement that I can store wherever I need to store it, in the pocket, anywhere, right? The reason why I store it the way I do store it is because this allows me to put it on if I get my own arm blown off and I only have one hand to work with, right? So what I can do is I can pull this out of my pocket. I usually use retaining bands to keep it on me, or my gear, whatnot, for ease of yanking it off. If I pull it off, it immediately is going to pop out, just like that. And this loop, what this loop is going to allow me to do is one-handed, put this on my arm, take my strap, and with one arm, simply yank, and it automatically is tightened all the way down. I didn't have to do any other work, one-handed. I can then take the windlass, one-handed, right? I just saved my own life in 4 seconds, okay? Super simple. And also, again, so this is nice, is it's gonna allow you to do that on your patient as well, right? Now, you will have to, if you have a very large patient, right, big legs, potentially you're gonna have to undo it, loosen it up a little bit, but don't lose your windlass here as you go through. Just keep it together, put it through. Now, what's great about the cat tourniquet as well, not ideal, some people's legs are so big that this actually will not get around them, right? So what you can do with the cat tourniquet, and it's not ideal, but we can make a jumbo-sized tourniquet, right? This tourniquet will fit on anyone's leg, right? It's not going to be ideal, but it will allow you to get it over your powerlifting friends, or whoever's got giant quads and legs, right? So that is how we store our tourniquets for, use to be able to save ourselves one-handed, and also ease of access to put it on our buddies, okay? So where do we put it on, people, okay? So sort of shore it up with this, right? How do I put the tourniquet on? A lot of people, we used to think we put it right above the wound. We've gone away from that, okay? We basically have a saying that we just say high and tight. You want it as high and as tight as possible. What that means is I want it up as high in my arm or up here in my crotch on my femoral, right? High and then as tight as possible. So the reason for that, let's say I have an amputation here at the forearm, I'm still going to place this as high as tight as possible. What it allows me to do then, if I need to, if it doesn't stop the bleeding, I can place another tourniquet below it and not cause any problems for me. Which the reverse of that, if I put it low and then try to put another one high, some complications to that, okay? So allows me to put on multiple tourniquets, right? And then it also allows me to get more pressure and access on the arterial regions, right? So if I can get it up high up in this axe pocket, I can actually get it on the artery to help stop the blood. And on my femoral artery, if I can actually get some pressure here on the tourniquet as well, it's really going to help me stop the bleeding, right? So as we get further down in our legs, those veins your veins are starting to be under your muscles, right? So it's a lot harder for you to actually cut the blood off. Whereas if you can get it right on the arteries, it makes it a lot more efficient to stop the bleeding. Okay, so that is pretty much a quick down and dirty of your tourniquets, right? So now, one last thing. Where can we place tourniquets? Okay, tourniquets are only from extremities, right? Injuries. So as high up as up into our armpit here and up into our groin here, right? Anything above the groin, right, or up into our shoulder or our armpit pockets and things like that, that is going to require wound packing, right? We can't get a tourniquet to stop the bleeding there, and that will be part 2 of Stop the Bleed, or in our March, our massive hemorrhage that we're going to talk about in the next video, is all the ways and techniques for you to use to wound pack. So if you have any questions about anything I talked about the tourniquets, shoot them in the comments. If you disagree with this stuff, you can talk to all the Special Forces medics who learned this stuff over 20 years of treating casualties, okay? So do what you're going to do, but I would highly suggest you go with this information when you're getting yourself set up, okay? One last thing, why is this important? Okay, so for all us gun owners out there, conceal carry every day, all that type of stuff. The entire purpose of your firearm is to induce traumatic injuries, right? So if we are going to be carrying something around that can induce traumatic injuries, potentially get us in a gunfight, we should probably be carrying around something that can stop that same traumatic injury if need be. So I always suggest if you're concealed carry, you also carry one tourniquet with you at least, in the event you actually have to use that weapon, get in a gunfight, respond to an active shooter, help anyone. This would be a great way for you to do it. All right.